This is your daily dose of all things royal. In the summer of 2026, Prince Harry quietly stepped away from the board of African Parks, the major conservation organization he had been linked to for a decade. The PR spin that has been given, both the Duke's spokesman and the charity itself, described the departure as a routine, quote-unquote, governance refresh, okay? After serving as president for 6 years and then joining the board in 2023, it was simply the right time, they say, for him to conclude his formal role. Harry, they added, remained a strong supporter of the organization's mission. The change coincided with the announcement that he, Meghan, and their children were preparing to leave California and return to the United Kingdom. And what's fascinating to watch right now is that everybody is failing to understand that the timing of this announcement was calculated. From my observation over the last several days, the timing gave a different perspective for many observers. We know African Parks has publicly acknowledged that some of its rangers had committed human rights abuses against Indigenous Baka people in a national park in the Republic of the Congo. But that information didn't really make mainstream until last year when Trump got into office. This news was already out there since 2023, but we all have seen that it was suppressed due to the censorship online. We know this because you see what the institution does to this channel. So just to quickly catch everybody up, in case you're new to this, African Park scandal began with these independent investigations that examined these allegations of beatings, torture, and rape. Claims first brought to wider attention by campaigners and media reports. The NGO Survival International, a group that had long criticized the charity's approach to conservation, had repeatedly called on Harry to resign. When the news of his departure finally came, the organization welcomed it while making clear that one man's exit did not erase a decade of association or resolve deeper questions about the model of fortress conservation itself. And from my observation over the last couple of days, the public's reaction quickly filled the space between the carefully worded statements being put out. Some saw the move as straightforward damage control, an attempt to create distance from a lingering scandal. Others speculated that Harry had been pushed out, or that the return to Britain required a cleaner public portfolio after the earlier turmoil at Bali. A few simply noted the end of a board term and left it at that. Across headlines and what we're seeing in social media, the human rights controversy remained the dominant backdrop. Harry's side continued to emphasize pride in the 10 years of involvement and an ongoing commitment to conservation in Africa. African Parks stressed that the board changes were mutually agreed and unconnected to any other matter. Between those official lines, however, a clear picture narrative took shape as we're seeing unfold. After years of association with an organization under serious scrutiny, the Duke of Sussex was stepping back, at least from the former role, while the questions raised by the abuses in the Congo continued to currently linger, and in fact, still happening. So I want people to understand that Harry stepping down is not solving the problem. In fact, what if I told you this isn't really about human rights abuses or Harry choosing to distance himself, but instead being the palace once again controlling the narrative to prevent the fallout if people ever discovered the role they played in all of this? I want you to hear me loud and clear. There's a very high possibility the palace was behind Harry stepping down. This was not about human rights abuses, but instead about money and about the intense scrutiny now facing this corrupted charity organization. Now, one thing that I want people to understand, especially to those who have been following me and have been supporting and helping to get these messages out, as well as writing letters and giving this information to the right people, understand that we are the ones who pushed Harry out of this organization. We did this. Stick around. I'm going to show you exactly what the palace is terrified the public will connect the dots on. But before I get into it, do the kid a favor. Please hit the like button and double check to make sure you're still subscribed, as we know how YouTube is in bed with these elites who don't want this kind of information to come out. I think many of us are understanding that this unfolding mess we're watching play out with this circus is designed to distract everyone from connecting the dots to the evidence that shows the Megxit scam was already being set up for Harry's move to America as far back as 2016. Yeah, you heard me right, 2016. I've already talked about this before, but it's good to refresh looking back at the timeline of Prince Harry's association with African parks. Just as Harry and Meghan were dating, it is announced in 2016 he is with this charity. In 2017, we see exactly 1 month after the engagement announcement, it is announced Prince Harry is being named president of this organization. But what people didn't pick up at the time was this president title was created just for Harry. Something I learned today after doing a little bit of research is that this role of president never existed before Harry and doesn't exist after Harry. When Kensington Palace officially announced, in parallel with the BBC as well as the rest of the media, Prince Harry's appointment as president of African Parks on December 27, 2017, exactly 1 month after it was announced that he was engaged to this woman, the lies started from Jump Street. In this post from Kensington Palace, it says here, Prince Harry has worked with African parks for a number of years. That's not true. Harry began working with this charity in the middle of 2016, so a little bit over a year. You can't really say that Harry was with this organization for very long. But here you have the palace creating the optics, portraying as if Harry put in the time with this organization to justify being given the optics of this leadership role called president, that now appears to be specifically created just for him. As president, Harry's role really was, this president title was a distinct, largely ceremonial, ambassadorial position introduced specifically just for Harry. This was about Harry exerting his soft power influence at the time to bring in money. That soft power influence was brought to the United States specifically to work with Senator Chris Coons and secure that American taxpayer dollars. Harry already knew about the human rights abuses, and so did the rest of the wealthy elite backing this organization. But they had no intention on doing anything about it. This was always about getting that taxpayer funding. You see, back in 2022, the U.S. government came in and cracked the whip. So it should come as no surprise that in 2023, right as the human rights scandal was gaining small traction in the mainstream, Harry was moved into a board position. That move was meant to protect not only Harry, but also the institution. Harry has now been removed from African parks because the United States government is currently scrutinizing the funding and of what that money has been really going towards, because we are the ones, especially the Americans like myself, have questioned it. You only have to look at the posts that I put up on X and know who's listening just by looking at the people that I tag. And something that I've been aware of is that they have been listening the whole time, especially to this one video that I did back in June. As I understand it, this is what pushed this decision over the edge, highlighting that there's $100 million that these wildlife organizations are salivating over that Rubio has yet to release. Take a listen to what I said back in June. That would help you understand a little bit better as to why this decision is happening now to remove Harry. So, since everybody already knows this, and clearly Harry's not going anywhere, and the reason why is because Harry is not currently affecting African parks financially. Yet. In this video, I'm going to explain to you what needs to be done so we can stop these atrocities happening to the Baka people. It goes on to say, even now, the problems on the ground have not been solved. On learning of the prince's renewed involvement in the organization, a Baka leader told Survival, "If they say they have fixed the situation, it's a lie. They're deceiving people over there. We don't work with them. The way the African parks treat us here is violent. were protecting the leader's identity as the Baka continue to face abuse by African park rangers while being denied access to their own land. Survival's director, Carolyn Pierce, says it's outrageous to see Harry's continued support to African parks despite the horrific human rights abuses committed by its rangers against the Baka, even after they were confirmed by the investigation it commissioned. African Parks has so far stubbornly refused to address the real root of the problem, that their model of fortress conservation is a colonialist and racist one that rests on kicking out the indigenous peoples whose land it is, while outsiders take control. If there is not a fundamental change in this conservation model, the Baka will be destroyed as a people. So once again, TRG has been proven right. Quelle surprise. For almost 3 years now, I've been talking about this eco-colonialism that Harry is participating in under the guise of conservation and using his travelists to promote this so-called luxury tourism under the guise of saving the planet, trying to look like he's a philanthropist with these billionaires. They're all doing it, but not really acknowledging what it is. This is colonizing the continent of Africa and its resources. And what we're seeing here is the indigenous people are being robbed of not only their lands, but their ability to exist. If you think Prince Harry and the royal family, which includes Prince William, gives a shit about these people, think again. This saving the planet garbage has always been about money. Some of you may or may not remember, if you saw this video that you're seeing right in front of you, titled "Do Not Pass Go, Do Not Collect $200, New scandal brewing, Prince Harry's involvement with African parks is worse than you can imagine, which I talk about $100 million injection into the organization as Harry took over as president, and somehow 30 million just vanished into the ether under Harry's watch with no explanation. But moving on. Indeed, an investigation was done by a firm led by Sherry Blair. And for those that don't know who Sherry Blair is, she is the wife of former Prime Minister Tony Blair. No, that's not suspicious. Getting this useful idiot to step down and denounce what African Parks is doing is not going to change a thing. Harry is doing everything he is supposed to be doing for his pa. Yesterday, a few of you sat with me to watch this testimony by Marco Rubio in front of the House. And towards the end, there was a representative by the name of Ryan Zinke from Montana who posed this question that perked my ears up.
Congress passed the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation in the 2025 NDAA. It passed with a wide bipartisan effort. I think you probably voted for it. But as you recall, what it was really an effort to have a public-private partnership to remove anti-poaching and cut off the funds for terrorist organizations in Africa, primarily, and you know the list. But I'm concerned, obviously, on it because per the law, it said that State Department was going to establish the board in consultation with Congress. Before, and the money's already been allotted. There's a lot of money in there, and I just recently came back from Africa, and it's happening every day that the poaching activities are again funding the terrorist organizations who are going out. And what I'd like is a commitment from the State Department to move forward on appointing the board, because at the end of the day, nothing can happen until the board meets to unleash the leveraged private dollars, which are, I think, 2-to-1 ratio. That can't happen. The program is at all standstill until the State Department appoints the board in consultation with Congress, but the first step is with you. Could I have your commitment that you're going to prioritize this?
And I told others we're going to follow up on that, but I believe there's a presidential appointment role in that board, if I'm not mistaken about the, so we'll have to check with White House and personnel as well, but I'll get you an answer. The board has been the impediment. You're right.
Yeah, and my understanding is reading the law, it's the State Department appoints. Yeah, no doubt in coordination with the White House, but if you would prioritize it, because I think this program is an incredibly important and effective program because it leverages private dollars like we haven't seen in Africa, and it is a problem.
Now, I couldn't tell you the motivation behind why Ryan Zinke was the one to bring this up and ask Marco Rubio, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with a lobbyist or one of these organizations, or somehow he has an interest in it. when it comes to the wildlife and conservation and the money that can be made from what they're trying to unleash here. This is not, doing this for caring about the world. This is about money, okay? And here we have a pot of money that had been set aside under this act that was passed back in 2024 while Biden was in office. So the money's there. And from a contractual standpoint, they have to give this money out, but before they could do that, they need this council set up, and that's what they're waiting on Marco Rubio to do. And on this council that he puts together will include NGOs that were a part of this process. We'll get into that in a second, but take a guess as to which senator had been leading the charge on this. If you guess Senator Chris Coons, Harry's bestie, then you would be correct. So this act, under the guise of conservation, this act authorizes legally up to $100 million annually of the U.S. taxpayer to go towards conservation and being invested into programs that allegedly is supposed to stop poaching and, saving wildlife. Yeah, they say that grants will support local communities and indigenous peoples, managing protected areas, focusing on countries with high biodiversity. But, African Parks was saying the same thing, and look at what they're doing. If you want to understand the origins of this relationship that Harry has with a U.S. senator from Delaware, go back to this video that you see here where it says corrupted thief, and you will see the documents that expose Harry attending this summit or hosting a summit where Chris Coons was in attendance and they were talking about conservation. I believe this is where the concept of where this Foundation for International Conservation came from and how they were going to siphon more American taxpayer dollars. The Annenberg Foundation was in attendance here. So assuming this is where this idea was birthed, and fast forward into 2024, and there's this act that has money specifically allocated legally. And the driving force or caucus that was behind getting this legislation together, that would be the ICCF group. So a little bit about the ICCF group, formerly known as the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, is a Washington, D.C. based nonpartisan 501c3 educational nonprofit that serves as the secretariat and support organization for the bipartisan U.S. Congressional International Conservation Caucus, which includes more than 1/3 of Congress members and over 20 similar parliamentary conservation caucuses it helps establish and sustain worldwide. And you can bet the UK has its own. It focuses on building cross-party political will for international conservation by convening legislators, providing briefings and events on biodiversity and protected areas, and running programs such as the International Conservation Corps to support on-the-ground management of protected areas. The group maintains its own board of directors, coordinates with partner nonprofits across Latin America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and convenes a conservation council of corporate and NGO partners, including ExxonMobil, Coca-Cola, Dow Chemical, Conservation International, and the African Wildlife Foundation. And here's the key part. To inform policymakers on conservation solutions, it was also a key advocate for the passage of the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation Act, the U.S. FICA, which is what we're talking about here in the release of this $100 million annually from the taxpayer. On their website, they proudly display the names of their partners, and as you can see here, African Parks is certainly a player here, as well as the Halo Trust and Oak Foundation. So it makes a hell of a lot of sense as to why Chris Coons is sitting with Harry in a Halo Trust event, as well as supporting Harry with African Parks. So now when we go back and we look at its partners and we see that African Parks plays a role here in helping to influence policy, we also see another organization tied to the royals, and that would be the World Wildlife Fund, right there with the little panda. So, King Charles was the World Wildlife Fund UK branch from 2011 all the way up to 2022, when Prince Charles ascended the throne and then just became patron of the organization. Now, while there may not be any record on file indicating that the World Wildlife Fund UK had any influence on helping support this legislation to get approved in Congress, doesn't mean that soft power hasn't been applied here. In fact, the ICCF group had honored King Charles with the Teddy Roosevelt Award that recognized his public leadership for extraordinary efforts in furtherance of international conservation. And you know who else won this award? That would be former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Yes, that would be the same Tony Blair whose wife led the investigations into this African Park scandal. So now when you look at Prince Harry and all that he's been up to here in the United States, on the down low, the stuff that the media refuses to talk about, that everybody has been suckered into believing just to keep us distracted from looking at this stuff, now it makes sense. I suspect the only reason why Harry became president of African Parks is because Charles had something to do with it. And I do believe that it all ties back to this money. Why would Prince Harry step down if back in October 2021, the U.S. House Committee on Natural Resources held an intense hearing to scrutinize the WWF regarding the same allegations that they funded, equipped, and supported park rangers who committed severe human rights abuses against indigenous peoples and local communities in Africa and Asia? Why would Harry step down if this also has been going on with the WWF? And despite the royal family's deep and decades-long involvement with this organization, they never once came out to denounce what was going on to these people or address it. That's why I said, we could scream all day long and shame Harry all day long for being connected to this organization and denounce him for not stepping up and using his platform. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the money is still going to come in. The only way that change will happen is if you disrupt where those funds are coming in from. And that's why it's important now that if Marco Rubio is going to be the one to decide who is on this council, and make sure that they have some type of bylaw that says that human rights abuses known to some of these organizations should immediately disqualify funds from going to certain groups that are part of projects. Because at this time, there are human rights abuses happening, and the money that's being pumped into so-called conservation to protect from poaching are the ones actually doing the abusing. They need to make sure that that doesn't happen. Otherwise, funds will not be released. And that's something that I think Marco Rubio should be well informed of and should put in the bylaws as at least one way to protect or reduce the abuse happening with the indigenous people. I think I speak for a lot of Americans. I wouldn't want my tax dollars going to projects that will end up with African parks, knowing that the money is enabling the abuse of these people. Certainly not. And I think we have a right to tell Marco Rubio that we don't want that to happen. So as he's planning this council with other members, and we're going to have to see who they choose, we need to be communicating with them. We need to be voicing our opinion here and making it known of what is going on, because I highly doubt they understand what's happening here. And there you have it. And because of all of you who have been writing, who have been sharing, is the reason why Harry had to step down. Not because, it's time for him to go, it's 10 years. Notice the timing of all of this. Harry's not going back because they're running out of money. Believe you me. African parks made a lot of money off the U.S. taxpayer during the Biden regime. I guarantee there was a chunk of that money flowing into the pockets of Harry and Meghan. So here's the thing. Prince Harry, the board of directors, as well as the CEO of African Parks cannot say that they didn't know that these human rights abuses had been going on, because the United States Government Accountability Office in 2020 put this organization on notice about funding being withheld if they didn't clean up their act with all of these abuses going on. So it's not like they didn't know. The State Department was very much aware, specifically African Parks, when they failed to adhere to protocols requiring abuse allegations to be reported to donors within 72 hours following a June 2022 allegation of sexual exploitation and abuse by an eco guard at one of their parks. Consequently, the State Department designated African Parks Network as a high-risk recipient, attaching mandatory extra conditions and monitoring updates to their grants. In July 2024, the report shows that they even failed at that. But the State Department under the Biden regime didn't care, and they continued to keep cutting those checks. But the moment that Donald Trump got into office, African Parks contracts ended up getting canceled, as well as money being retracted. And the same thing happened with the Halo Trust. That's why Harry was so bitter in Ukraine, begging for more people to donate to the Halo Trust because funds were getting cut. Believe me when I say that this has everything to do with the work that we've been doing. While we may not be seeing this on the mainstream media, just know that in the background, it's us who are driving this change. It really is. So now, when you combine the timeline of Harry's involvement with what was happening here in the U.S. to secure and steal America's wealth, Harry's dad and his brother's association and heavy influence with these wildlife organizations, and the royal family's deliberate choice to stay silent and not use their soft power to help stop these human rights abuses, it tells you exactly why the pile-on against Harry is happening. Any other discovery would destroy the illusion of the royal family being above it all. I think we all see that the games being played here are very powerful. But as I said earlier, just know that we made the difference in this instance. It may never get reported, and the clickbait will continue to protect this cover-up at all costs. But you can see the facts are right here. It's now on you to make the conscious decision to break out of this psychosis about what the royal family is supposed to represent. It's definitely not representing the people, that's for sure. Yeah, it's very hard to defend even William and Catherine now for not knowing what has been going on here in the United States. Very hard. I'm still trying to give the benefit of the doubt, but even that window is closing now. The last thought that I want to put out to everybody, just to get your feedback, is this whole situation with Sophie Chandaka, and remember the interview that she did on Sky with sitting next to her Ian Ralston to push these bullying allegations? Well, we don't talk about this enough, but Ian Ralston is a trusted ally of Prince William. And the main question that I have about this is, do you really think that if this feud was really genuine, would Harry be comfortable having this guy Ian hanging around his business, knowing full well his close relationship with William? This wouldn't be such a big deal to me if this was a one-off example, but I've shared with you recently the various people that are in Harry and Meghan's orbit, also in the same orbit of the royal family. So it makes you wonder, why would the royal family collaborate and bring into their circle people that Harry and Meghan have been working with? You follow me? And the last thing that I'll leave you here to think about is this actual lawsuit. Do we know if this is even something real? Because currently in the system, does anybody find it strange that this was filed months ago and it still has no initial case filings uploaded, and that Harry and this other guy, Mark Dwyer, don't even have lawyers secured for it? We have to remember that the institution has unlimited amounts of resources and money to throw at legal cases. Just look at where Samantha Markle's case went. It went nowhere. And I believe that they knew it wouldn't go anywhere. But it had us all chasing our tails to keep us distracted. And I hope that after spending years with me, you two can finally see that we were really taken for a ride. And I think what we're seeing too is that you have people who recognize that we've been lied to, but for them to go ahead and admit it or to change course, it's going to be very difficult, because that would mean they would admit that they were duped and they fell for it. It's very hard to acknowledge that. When I realized that this whole thing was one giant scam, you definitely feel kind of stupid that you didn't trust your own instincts when deep down inside we all knew something wasn't right here. I think we're at this point where we're not going to see any of these journalists or certain commentators come forward and admit that they got it wrong. We're just not going to see it. What we're seeing is they would rather spin this bullshit narrative to save face. Like, I can understand it, because there's going to be a lot of people angry. A lot. And everything that I've shared with you on this channel is purely what's out there in the public domain and using common sense and logic. That's it. I can't in good conscience go along with the narratives that the media is forcing everybody to go along with. I just can't. Because if I did, then nothing that we are watching right now unfold, I believe, would be happening. Definitely not for African parks. Just sharing my thoughts and opinions. But what do you guys think? Definitely let me know. Comments below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Such a fraud.